I'd like to ask two more questions. I'll ask them both at the same time, and then maybe just get some brief answers. But we want to leave about half an hour for you all to ask questions. So let me just put these questions out there and just answer them briefly. One is jobs, jobs, jobs. And we're not talking about Steve Jobs, jobs, real jobs. You think about technology shifts, smart grids. So on the one hand, enables all sorts of different applications. On the other hand, all those meter readers are going to be probably out of work because increased efficiency. So what does this all mean in terms of real employment effects on the overall economy in terms of jobs? That's question number one. Question number two is just following off of Brendan's last point about the home getting to the last sort of threshold needing PV. Thinking about technology step change, PV, I think 5 or 6 years ago, many of us wouldn't have expected the price to have dropped so radically. What other sort of big technology changes do you see coming on the horizon? One that's talked about a lot but doesn't seem to have much of any effect at the moment is electric vehicles, for instance. So, anyone want to?
I'll kick off on the jobs front, simply because I have another role as chairman of Smart Grid Ireland, which is a not-for-profit national advocacy group representing stakeholders who include all the utilities, the transmission system operator, a bunch of multinationals and some consumer groups, and it's a not-for-profit advocacy group representing Northern Ireland and Southern Ireland jurisdictions. And we meet with ministers and policymakers regularly. And one of the things that when the business case for investment in smart grid deployment, whatever it is made, it's judged on its merits. If you go and talk to Ofgem, and we've met Ofgem at the beginning of January, and they have got prescribed and correct rules and regulations for assessing how the business case benefits can be assessed. But sitting out here are they're real tangible benefits. And Andreas and I were talking about this just going into lunch about growing economies, and understanding the infrastructure investment at scale. Okay, there is displacement because some of it would happen anyway, but there's a real chance here when you see the claims made for the island of Ireland with the amount of wind it's got. Scotland, offshore, I mean, it's enormous, and you have to then find a way for policy and regulation and investment rules to come together to make that case easier, longer payback periods and government understanding the macroeconomic benefit there. I'll just talk to that piece as a kick-off.
Any other comments on that? Or should we move on to the technology question?
No, briefly to the job question. Yeah, I don't think that and that's also, I think, a lesson from history. You will never keep jobs in inefficient environments. Yeah, they are never stable. So if we see there is a new technology and the people that do the data collection manually today will not have a future, you can subsidize this for 2 or 3 years, but this is really, you could also put the money elsewhere. Yeah, it's just lost. Better put it then in innovative things. Yeah, and I don't know. On the other hand, it could then be that the construction industry, for example, the home construction industry will boom. Yeah, because all the people, all the houses get insulated, and with higher energy bills, there's immediately a business case behind it. So I do not buy into the job argument, because you cannot protect things that are in inefficient environments.
I think the construction sector is a fantastic growth opportunity. I think we've already seen in the UK that people are scaling up for this Green Deal market, and I've seen that in other areas around the world. There's a huge market in refurbishing or retrofitting energy efficiency technologies to existing buildings, and in the 80% of carbon emissions in the cities need to be tackled with the buildings themselves. On the electric vehicle side, new developments that I'm working on are already planning the infrastructure in for electric vehicles. It has to happen in urban environments, particularly. We really need that. What happens outside of the cities is a slightly more difficult question, and the advance of battery technology has a has a big part in how quickly that changes. I think biofuels and whether that has a role is another big question. I think we just simply don't have enough land area, and we have too high a demand for food going forward to really use biofuels beyond some transition phase. And if that's an issue in road vehicles, it's even more an issue in aviation, which doesn't really have any plan B beyond carbon-intensive fossil fuels, unless they go to hydrogen, and really big safety risks of that.
Great. Well, thanks. Okay, so we have until past, so we've got about 25 minutes for questions from you all. I certainly have more, so we can keep on going, but I want to open up the floor. So there's I think Ramin's got a question over there. I'm going to mic over. Yep.
Just on the government's Green Deal point, it's certainly a very UK-centric question, so apologies for that, but I'm just curious to know the views. Thumbs up or big flop waiting to happen?
We've got some research being published on Monday, which I can't talk about, unfortunately, but it's embargoed to them, but that, I think, answers some of that question. But to give a sort of preview of my view, it needs some sort of turbocharge to really make it work and to get over this uptake problem, particularly in the private sector. The government's allocated 200 million, which is great to really sort of get things started, but that's nowhere near enough to see the level of uptake that we need to achieve the speed of reductions in domestic properties in the UK. I think just the general idea of a finance mechanism where you break this problem where people have 3-year horizon or short-term horizon on investing in energy efficiency in their homes, so refuse to look at solid wall insulation and measures that have longer than the 3-year payback is a good one. The primary mechanism in the Green Deal where you have a golden rule where the energy efficiency savings outweigh the cost repayments for the measures is unproven. We've done a lot of analysis, but it's unproven. The tools that are set to be used to calculate this are unproven. So we are going to go through a big learning exercise as the first few years of this mechanism work the way through.
Can I just supplement that by asking, you talked about the internal mechanics of it, I'm more curious about sort of the customer view. This is going to have to be done on people's sofas, and they're going to have things like go on like explain to them, and then find that in 3 years' time they're not seeing numbers they thought, because the bit that's about just continuing to use conventional energy is going to go up anyway. So they're going to go back over 3 years and go, actually, my total was greater, so what's happened?
I think there really hasn't been enough work done on the whole customer side of things. I think even government might admit that themselves, that it's a very complicated mechanism. There's pages and pages of documentation about how it all works and the sort of finance side of things, but actually work around, does this make a compelling proposition to the customer? Will there be sufficient customer pull? Is again unproven. I think the social housing market, the registered provider market, have done most work to understand uptake in customers via different pilot schemes, but whether people have really looked at the full private occupier market, I don't think anyone's really cracked that. But we will need the big retailers, so Tesco's and the B&Qs and these sort of guys to incorporate this mechanism into their offerings.
Okay, other questions? Down here, Liz. Yeah.
Hi, I'm an MBA student here at London Business School, and my question is about pricing. So I guess in the morning we heard that the price of energy is going to kind of stay high for a very long time. To what extent do you think actually pricing does influence demand? So, and how much of a price increase do you need to see to really see a reduction in energy demand? And then kind of do people adjust to it over time, or does that effect stay over the long time, just based on what you've seen?
I reckon energy prices need to be treble what they are now. If you had energy prices treble what they are now, one, you'd have all the money that the energy companies would need to invest in the new technologies. The new technologies would work without government intervention. And finally, you'd get energy reduction, massive energy reduction from the consumer. And that would be my utopian way forward.
I have a simple answer. Who of you knows your telephone bill? Your man. Okay. Who of you knows your electricity bill? So I think that gives you an, yeah. As soon as you remember how much you pay and have at least a knowledge and transparency about it, probably you are on the level of awareness where you really take an active influence on your consumer behavior.
And I think that the one thing that I do know about billing is the key thing that everybody needs in the energy market is a direct consumer response to a purchase or a buy indicator, and that is through money. And if you look at the mobile telephone billing system, they do it to the second. Now, if you could do to the second billing to the house and offer them a tariff with punitive penalties if you go over that tariff and certain times of the day, you've got that would work, but that's going to require huge amounts of processing power to do it. But I think that's the only really direct way you can change consumer behaviour.
Okay. It's not pricing, again, it's a personal view, but what is clearly understood is there's a huge strata of society who are calling vulnerable customers, do you know? Mm-hmm. And they have to be taken account of by the politicians in the policy they make and the regulators, and then that's pushing back on what investments can take place because of price pass-through. It's an influence.
Mm. Yeah. Okay, next question. I think we've got one in the back there.
Yeah, it's David Casale. I'm actually Chief Executive of a small supplier in the UK market. Just on the price point, we have 1 in 5 consumers in the UK who are classified as fuel poor. So if we treble prices, I'd hate to live in that society. It's economically correct, and I understand where you're coming from, but we have to be very careful that there are a lot of people out here in our society that can't afford the things we're talking about.
If you go to Sweden, where energy prices are double what they are in the UK, energy poverty ceases to exist. Energy poverty does not exist in Sweden. And I think the politicians need to start looking and investigating why energy poverty exists in the UK and energy poverty doesn't exist in Sweden, because they've got a pretty similar demographic and energy consumption makeup.
We set ourselves a target in the UK of eradicating fuel poverty by 2016. And ever since we set that policy, it's done nothing but go up. We set ourselves a target in Kyoto of reducing emissions of carbon dioxide by 5% from 1990 levels. They're currently 40% above 1990 levels, and judging by this morning's presentation, about to go to 80% above carbon. So we are failing the consumer. So I think we have a massive issue with engaging our industry with consumers, because ultimately it is population, it is consumers that have this desire for these products. It's consumers that wish to live in a sustainable society.
Do you have a question?
No. So okay. It's really, sorry, so to get to the point, my question would be, what can we do to engage customers on the issues of energy from across the spectrum, from this afternoon and also from this morning?
Well, I'm not the consumer guy here, but I was fortunate to attend a keynote speech given by a guy called Bob McDonald. Bob McDonald is the CEO of Procter & Gamble, the €80 billion or $80 billion soap powder guys, as he would describe himself. But the pretext of his talk, or the theme of his talk, was, is selling the smart grid the same as selling soap powder? and that's about consumer engagement, the mission, understanding what you were there for, and his talk began and finished with a light switch, and people's understanding of everything that was behind it, and it was a societal approach, partly to our friend's point there, and the one I was making about the recognition, certainly in the circles that I've been attending, vulnerable customers are mentioned with increasing regularity and how they're catered for.
That's a good point.
I think the sort of smart meter rollout, the change in the way that we provide consumers information is a fantastic opportunity. I've seen some great prototypes of meters that have really sort of intuitive displays, sort of showing sort of mileometer type dials, and so little displays saying how many cups of tea they can make. Now their solar panels have been generating all day. So I think people just don't, lots of people that speak to in the domestic market don't really currently understand or want to understand kilowatts and these sort of units that of energy that the energy industry just uses our common language. So just changes in the way that we interact and through smart meters, I think, is the big opportunity.
Okay, further questions? Down in the middle here, and then we'll get to you.
Stephen McCabe. I have a question in two parts. I'm picking up on the thing that Brendan said about increasing production, and my personal view that the efficiency is a bit of a red herring in this whole process. The volume is going to continue to go up in emerging companies amongst consumers as we buy more devices and so on. So one thing we haven't talked about is the change in the production mix that's likely to happen. I particularly wonder who's going to drive that, what it's going to be, and what the economics of it are. I'd sort of like to add to that the point on the smart grids. I'm curious who the customers are for it. It's a fantastic idea. Who's making these investments at the moment in smart grid technology?
What the question I'd like to pose is, what is a smart grid? Because I hear it, I go to our smart grid group and I get a different answer from each person. I think what we're saying is, we all know what a gun grid is, and that's what we've got today. And for me, a smart grid is anything that will do anything slightly better than what we're doing today, is my understanding. I think in terms of, just going back to the previous comments as well by the gentleman at the back there, the view is that in the future you're going to have decentralised, if you take the developed economies, you're going to have decentralised energy and you're going to have the prosumer. And the way you get engagement with the public is not by being a consumer, but by being a prosumer, because then once the public's getting paid for stuff that they're making, there's an engagement as to what energy is. The second thing is the people providing the service, I won't call it energy service, but the service, will be a recognised brand that has got no direct relationship to energy, but it's got a recognised brand for something else that the consumer really likes and trusts. And that is probably how it will go. So you'll have lots of microgrids or community level grids, and you'll have community engagement. The issue then is going to be about how many prosumers. So how many prosumers do you need in the network? So how many generators do you need on the network? You're still going to need a grid to balance it, and that's where there's a lot of money to be made from a utility perspective. But in terms of dealing with an individual customer, small scale, that is where the market's going to change the most. Don't know what it's going to be, but it'll be different.
If I pick up on the second part of the question about smart grid investments, they're going on at scale around Europe, a small scale, admittedly. Some of it is stimulus funded as an accelerant. And if you take the example that Andreas gave about low carbon London, that's part of a £500 million 5-year programme run by Ofgem to encourage the adoption of low carbon technologies to get us by utilities. And that's just completed its second year. The third year starts this year. And I have to say the amount of innovation that's come out and innovative ideas for utilities to engage with that are enormous, and we're really encouraged. It's going to, because it'll penetrate deeper and deeper. But at a very practical level, call it smart grid, call it grid modernisation, whatever, there's an inexorable, aging process going on here in the assets. There's a demand, a greater load-bearing capability that they have to cope with the increasing demand. There's an ageing workforce. There's a need to change and upskill that workforce to live in the control room of the future. So business as usual can be used by business as usual. I mean, just replace the wires and cables with more wires and cables but that cost relative to the efficiency of investment you get from, I'll call it a smart grid technology investment, and companies like Siemens and GE, we are in that market of providing that efficiency. And it comes back in the business case, and we haven't really talked about this, the business case that the utility considers has to take to the regulator, no matter where in the world, or certainly in Europe, will contain, if there's smart grid technology embedded in it, efficiencies like being able to defer investment. If you can put sensor measurement, to provide a capability called dynamic line rating, and you can therefore carry more energy or electrons down the cable. The case, that's all part of the mix. So it's going on. There's not going to sit here and score a card, but it's embedded, as a way forward. Okay.
And to build on that, I mean, for the very innovative thing, like new marketplaces where you engage consumers and so on, you need at the beginning stimulation money, because you do not know all the parameters of the business case. For this traditional investment, I mean, we know that the global energy production and consumption will go up. Hopefully, it will not go up in the same way as the growth of the global economy. So that is then the difference is the energy efficiency, the additional energy efficiency we bring into the system. And we know that we also need more, for example, transmission and distribution capacity, because the distances between consumptions and production will be even bigger. So if we would act in the same way the entire industry did it the last 20, 30, 40 years, it would be not affordable. So what for example, one of the traditional planning scenarios was that they had an N-1 principle. That means there was always redundancy. So that if one line went off with this N-minus or N+1 scenario, you had always one spare line that you could immediately drive. This won't work anymore. You need more intelligence in the thing, better protection systems, better IT to control it, better automation systems. And that wise you can avoid investment into hardware, into copper, just digging copper under the earth. And you need not that much replacement in the traditional and installed infrastructure. And so that immediately pays off, because you actually avoid investment in overinvestment by more innovative solutions, by using more innovative solutions.
Great, thanks. Okay, now finally back up here.
Thank you. I wanted to know if we could hear a little bit more about the Home of the Future project. Because if, for example, I'm thinking if their energy bill went up and they had electric cars, did that increase in energy in their electricity bill make up for whatever they saved from fuel, for example? So was there an actual energy in, BTUs or megawatt hours? Was there a decrease in that sense?
No. Because when we took the electric vehicles away, the bills were still a lot higher than they were previously. The issue was the intelligence of all the devices in the home always being on. And this is what I was going on about energy efficiency. All of those appliances were A rated or A plus rated, the most efficient appliances you can get, but they were always on. And in fact, what was a real problem, and you might have seen it if you saw the first episode, was to begin with, the owner of the house had a little bit of an end of day scenario where he turned everything off. And the first time my son used the car to drive to work, he was halfway down the motorway and realised it'd only been half charged up because it's turned everything off. And that also caused other problems because we had to reboot everything in the morning when he turned everything back on. So again, it comes down to customer behaviour. You can't, and it really does give me a lot of concern about Green Deal, because Green Deal, how do you audit it? How do you make sure that when you change your hands and sellers of the house, that the new people are going to get the same benefit? And that, for me, is a big issue. Because actually, the thing about energy consumption is consumer behaviour and choices. And that's what you've got to influence. But yeah, Home of the Future is an eye-opener about how bad things could be.
Okay, we have 5 minutes, unfortunately. And I know this is maybe not the most popular way to do it, but I'm going to take a collection of questions, and then you guys can decide which one you'd want to answer. Because if I pick one of you, then I'm just not going to. So let's if we can get the roving mic up to the top to the gentleman now in the middle, and then we'll do the rapid fire. Short question, please.
Smart grid, smart user, now smart devices. What about electric cars and shifting the whole of Britain over to the electric vehicle fleet? How are we going to do that?
Okay. Electric vehicles, yourself?
How do you actually manage to convince people when private equity firms will say, oh, return on the investment in 8-10 years, not interested. The private investors will say, yeah, okay, I can get feed-in tariffs, renewable heat incentives, and so on, but they will still see their investment back in 8 to 10 years. How do you change the patterns and behavioral patterns to convince people to do that?
In order to increase the penetration of the intelligent infrastructure, what regulatory proposals would you put forward?
You mentioned that the urbanization is a big driver as well. Does this also mean that a lot of the innovation is then going to go more to China, where this urbanization is now going through such a speed?
Yeah, hi. Also an MBA student. I'd like to know about Siemens' view of the future of solar and solar thermal energy, especially with their purchase of solar thermal energy and their position in the Desert Tech initiative. What are the future prospects for that?
Okay, so we've got a question about EVs in the UK, regulatory suggestions, urbanization role of China, specific question for Siemens on solar thermal, and question I didn't quite understand, but something about payback periods for consumers. And yeah.
Almost as many questions as speakers here. So
right.
So pick one.
So pick one. I think yours is pre-picked for you, unfortunately.
I'll do electric vehicles.
Electric vehicles, okay. Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay, well, electric vehicles in the UK, will they provide a benefit? No. Electric vehicles in the UK, are going to happen? Yes. What type of electric vehicles is going to be there? I haven't the faintest idea, but there will be a mixture of battery, full battery, hybrid, fuel cell, and any other combination, flywheel, I don't care. Electric vehicles will happen. It's going to be a big problem. How we get around it, I don't know. And I think the urban solutions are the easiest. Extra urban solutions, that's the problem. And that's the problem that electric vehicles will provide to the network.
So Andreas, did you want to comment on solar?
Okay,
solar
Siemens
thermal?
Solar. Let me start with a very big picture, right? Because, I mean, there is this fantastic scenario of Desert Tech you have mentioned. And I don't know who is aware or has a basic idea of Desert Tech. Okay, yeah, because, I mean, from a general concept, you could say that you could provide all the energy consumed in Europe from a small part of the Sahara, and not the one where you have the sand but the stones. So you do not even do environmentally something bad. However, there are extreme many parties involved. Yeah, and extreme amount of players. And then the second thing is that we all thought that when we started 3 or 4 years ago, that this was in a pretty stable political environment. And you all know what happened in Northern Africa in the last year. Yeah, so that certainly put some some challenges on the overall program. I still believe it will come, but it will take time, and I think we will not start with the big things. We will start with smaller things. And we will start with power plants in these North African countries, starting with Morocco, but also now Tunisia, Algeria, hopefully also soon Libya. And that these power plants will first produce energy that is consumed there, and building the infrastructure and building an industrial environment there to grow their local economies, to also avoid any political frictions. And if they have developed in a way which is also good for the population there, for the political stability, then probably we would grow the whole thing in a way that they are able to export. And then these challenges have to be met, how to transport the energy through France, through Italy, and to all countries, and Spain, and so on. All countries also with certain particular interests. But if there's a right business model behind, I think we get these aligned. But I think it's in this, on the small scale, that is already started. We have built already several power plants in Northern Africa, and I think it's good to first serve the local economies there.
Great.
When you take the
regulatory suggestions, yes, please.
Unfortunately, it's not something I think would ever happen, but I think if we could turn the clock back pre-Kyoto and look at the question of whether we go for cap and trade or carbon tax, I think I'd definitely go for carbon tax now. Consistent global carbon tax. In the UK, the government likes to try and reduce the number of policies and cut red tape. What we have at the moment is a really complicated array of different carbon price drivers. You've got the electricity price itself, CRC, and that's mirrored across the world. And it's just very, very confusing and creates some very strange outcomes. So I think just clarity of carbon price signal is absolutely necessary. We've been talking about energy efficiency, but I think my point earlier about rebound effects and decoupling suggests we have to decarbonise the electricity grid, so we have to have a clear carbon pricing signal that drives that. And then hopefully we can do both energy efficiency reduction and clean energy generation and emissions decoupling.
I'd just like to add to the regulatory challenge question. The current focus of regional regulation, by and large around Europe, is to drive cost efficiency. And the utility, for those of you that don't know, it has a basket of assets which is agreed with the regulator as being that those assets needed to deliver their commitment to supply or carry energy. That regulated asset base has a fixed rate of return according to the country you're in. And one of the innovations that I've seen in Portugal and Italy is that the regulator there allows an increase on whatever their, I don't know the figure, whatever their regulated rate of return is. Where it's a smart grid infrastructure investment, they're allowed 2 or 3 percentage points more for return on capital on that investment, with a payback or a penalty, if it doesn't achieve the carbon reductions and the efficiencies that it claims. And that's a new approach to the business case, plus the off-balance sheet benefit of the business case about wealth creation in the economy. They've got to find a way, I believe, to take account of that. And the last one is to find a way to allow, in my case, I'll make a case for GE, the GEs and other multinationals who might be in the room, to make common cause to drive innovation without the utility being the only innovator. We've got massive R&D investment dollars, which are, the utilities are our customers, but we're also partners at the table. So it's a complex mix for the regulator to take account of, but that's the type of engagement we should be having.
Great, that's a terrific final last word, and I think it just remains for us to thank the panel in the customary way.